I'm Ron Kokish with Age Friendly Carbondale. We are the voice of aging in Carbondale, and we're happy to bring you this evening's program with Sue Gray, who I know from the Carbondale Historical Society. She's done several programs for us. And Sue is a master gardener. I won't begin to give you her credentials. She's gardened in many places. And she was just telling me earlier that this is probably the most difficult place that she's gardened.
Yeah.
So hopefully, especially if you haven't done much gardening in the Rockies, she's going to make it a little easier for you today. And this program is being recorded, and it will be online at agefriendlycarbondale.org, as well as on Garfield County Regional Library's website. So you don't need to take notes. It should be up. Usually we have it up in a couple of days.
Great.
Sue?
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
And you've got a mic on, right?
I've got a mic
so
on.
I'm going to hold this and give it to people who
Okay. Well, thanks for coming out tonight on this spring day. Experiencing all of the weather of spring today, so it's perfect. And so I moved here from Southern California in '97. Before that, I lived in Hawaii. So of course, when I came here and I tried to grow all the things that I grew in those places, I had no clue what I was doing. I was very unsuccessful at growing anything. Pretty much didn't grow a tomato for the first 10 years that I lived here. So I did two things. I went to the CSU Master Gardener program, became a Master Gardener, and I joined the Historical Society because I wanted to know how the pioneers grew their food. If they could do it, I figured I could do it. If I could learn how the pioneers did it, then maybe I could do it too. So I really joined the Historical Society as a gardener, and I created their heritage gardens. So there's a heritage garden at the Jail and Cabin History Park on Went, and there's a heritage garden at the Thompson House Museum at the north end of River Valley Ranch. And so I decided that, because there's so many challenges in growing in the Rockies, it would be great if I started teaching. So I do teach gardening classes and seed saving classes at CMC. I teach beginning gardening, or for people who just moved here but have been great gardeners in other places, beginning in the Rockies type gardening. So what are our challenges here in the Rockies? Weather, of course. Water, it's very dry here. Wind, can be very windy. And wabbits, or wildlife. So we'll start with weather. And we have frost in the spring and the fall. Yeah, and the summer sometimes, yes, we have frosts. So for that kind of situation, frost, a blanket cover, Remay is the commercial term for a brand of blanket, frost blanket. You can use that. It can also be used in the fall to cover your plants for frost. It works great in the spring and the fall. And then there's this wall of water, which is really good for tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and squash, and that kind of thing. So you just fill up the tubes with water, and that provides insulation against the frost. You really don't want the plant sticking out the top here because that will get frostbitten if it's sticking out like that. It should be down below the top of it. Hail is a big problem here too. It can come anytime. Sometimes you get a warning, weather alert, but sometimes you don't know when it's going to turn from rain to hail. So this plastic mesh fabric works really well. You can also use this Remay or a cotton sheet just to cover your beds if there's going to be hail coming, because they can really devastate your plants. And you should sign up for weather alerts from the National Weather Service, because then you will get things like this: frost advisory, and precautionary preparedness actions, and it specifically says gardening interests should protect sensitive crops and vegetation. So it actually tells you this is the time you want to cover your plants. So if you don't sign up for a weather alert on your phone, at least check the weather, what the weather forecast is going to be in the spring if you've got sensitive plants outside. Okay, water. You can get your water from municipal sources, so pipes, or it might come from the ditch to water your garden. If it comes from the ditch, there's a lot of silt in it, so that can affect your watering ability. Silt can muck up your hoses, especially your drip hoses, and these kind of sprinklers here, if they don't have a big hole, if they have a bunch of little small holes, those will get all clogged up. So make sure you have either a filter or you're using some kind of system that won't get clogged up if you have ditch water. The other problem with ditch is it only comes on at a certain time of year and then it goes off again. So I live in Setank, and even though the town ditches are all running now, my ditch doesn't start running until maybe the first week of May. So even though I could be planting peas and lettuce and all that stuff right now, I don't have any water. I would have to use my house water, which in Setank is expensive because they buy it from Carbondale and then sell it to us. So I don't want to use my house water to grow my vegetables, otherwise they're very expensive vegetables. So remember, water freezes at 32 degrees, so if it's going to freeze that night, you want to disconnect your hoses. And it weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon, so if you're watering with a watering can, make sure that you get one you can lift up if it's full. So don't get a 2-gallon watering can. That's going to be like almost 17 pounds to lift up. So just use small watering cans, but the best really is this type of system. Drip system doesn't evaporate the water like the overhead sprinkling will evaporate really quickly. You put a water timer on here and you can just set it to go off a few times a week for a few hours and you don't even have to worry about it. It just waters it for you. It's not a real expensive system. If you have a huge garden, maybe it could be, but if you have a small garden, this is a very affordable way to water. The other thing about drip is it doesn't put water in the pathways. So if you have this overhead watering, it's going everywhere. So it's going in your beds, but it's also going in your paths, and then you have weeds growing up in your paths. All right, and how much water? This is a real hard one. I think the main reason why people's gardens fail here is because they're not getting enough water. It's just so dry here. The water evaporates out of the soil really quickly. Overhead watering, you would need 10 minutes for every 4 square feet. So a 12 by 12 garden bed would need 1.5 hours of watering. So you're not going to stand there for 1.5 hours with your hose and sprinkler. That's why the timing and just setting it and walking away is great. If you have a drip or soaker, it takes even longer, 20 minutes per 4 square feet, so about 3 hours of watering. If you don't know if you're too dry or too wet, do a fist test. Just grab a handful of soil and squish it in your fist. Close your fist real hard on it. When you open it up, if it's like this, falling apart kind of, and your hand is all muddy, that's too wet. This is obviously too dry. This is just right. That's what you want. You want it to hold together, but not be so wet and muddy that it's dripping all over your hand. And another thing you can do is dig a 4-inch deep hole to check for water penetration, because you want that water to penetrate down here all the way to the bottom of the root zone. Otherwise, your roots are really shallow. If you only water 2 inches down into the soil, your roots are only going to go 2 inches into the soil. They're not going to go any deeper than that, because that's where the water is. So you want to make sure you get really good penetration. You want to deep water 2 to 3 times a week. So this is what you will get if you're deep watering 2 to 3 times a week. Nice, deep root systems. If you only water shallowly, even if you water 7 days a week, it won't be good enough. It won't penetrate down into that soil. It'll just evaporate out of the top of that soil there. So 2 to 3 times of deep watering is better than every day of shallow watering. And you also want to mulch to prevent the evaporation from the soil. So you can see the straw all around here on this plant. This is leaves, here's straw. You can use grass clippings, just something to cover the soil so that the water just doesn't evaporate right out of it. And it also controls weeds. So mulch is a great tool to use. Wind. So when you're considering wind affecting your garden, this is a nice solution over here if you're doing something permanent. But if you just want temporary wind breaks, you can use those frost blankets or sheets or anything like that just to pin up if there's going to be a really windy day affecting your garden. And then you can take them down when the wind subsides. And you want to make sure that you're not blocking the sun when you're putting up your wind breaks. So if the wind is coming from the south and you're trying to prevent it from coming from the south, you're also going to prevent the sun from getting into your garden. So maybe a temporary windbreak would be better in that case. Okay, rabbits and other animals. Pets can be a problem. Here's my kitty, and she likes to go in there and dig and defecate in my garden. So this plastic mesh netting keeps her from getting in there until I open it up, and then she goes right in. It'll also keep out, dogs, rabbits generally won't be able to get in there. Squirrels can get in there. They can get into anything. This plastic fencing can be maybe a temporary fencing when you're getting your garden started so the animals don't get in there and dig around in your soil. But they won't keep out deer. Deer can jump right over that. Chicken wire is my favorite thing in the world because I use it for everything. I put it over my bulbs in the spring so the deer won't eat my tulips. Here I'm growing Amish deer tongue lettuce in the Heritage Garden, and this is supposed to go to seed because we sell the seeds at the museums. So you can see the flowers on top of the lettuce here. The deer love these flowers. So one year they ate all the flowers off the tops of my lettuce and I had no seeds. So I've learned to put the chicken wire on. If you have a garden and you have deer problems, you need to fence it off 8 feet high, otherwise they'll jump right over that. So, and then other things can dig under, but if you have like a foundation, that goes into the soil a little bit, that'll keep digging animals from getting in there too. We have some rodents here that are a problem, mainly ground squirrels. That's this guy up here. They will dig into gardens and eat the roots from underneath in their holes. And they'll also eat the fruits, the leaves, everything that they can get in your garden. They're really difficult to control. We have prairie dogs, so not the same as ground squirrels. Prairie dogs do not really affect our gardens. They stay in their prairie dog towns and they eat their wild food, and they really don't come in to our gardens very much, so that's not much of a problem. We don't really have gophers that I've seen. I've never seen a gopher here. I don't know if anybody else has, but that seems to be not a Rocky Mountain animal. Same with the mole. We don't have a lot of moles, and that's probably because the digging here is hard. There's lots of rocks in the soil, so maybe they just don't like our soil. But we do have voles. So this is a vole, and that's a vole. You can see it's about the same size as a mouse, but a mouse has bigger ears and a longer tail. Mice are not so much a problem in the garden, but they are a problem if you're saving seeds or collecting seeds. They like the seeds of the plants. And voles will eat a lot of stuff. They will eat roots in the ground, underground. They'll dig up and eat the roots from underneath. And they'll eat a lot of other strawberries, berries, those kind of things. So voles are difficult to control too. And unfortunately, rodents, there's no real good way to control rodents. They're just really hard to get rid of. There's services here you can call, and they will come and sweep out all the rodents from your garden. You could construct Fort Knox. Maybe that would keep them out, but maybe not, because rodents are very persistent. And this, this might keep out rabbits. Rabbits can also dig, so they could dig a hole under and get in there and devastate. So there's one final solution, and we all know what that is. To get rid of those wascally wabbits.
Do you know what the services are that they apply to the garden?
Yeah, they do have poisoning, so they'll put, oh, right.
I'm not sure.
She's talking to her.
Do you have a service or, actually, I think it's not.
It is.
What is the service that they apply to the gardens for the holes?
There's two kinds. One is poison, so they put poison around the holes, or actually in the holes, and then they eat the poison and die. The other way is putting hoses down into the holes and flooding them out. Yeah. Any other questions?
To catch ground squirrels, that's the microphone. People online need to hear you. Talking to the microphone. So the easiest way to catch.
You need to hold it close.
Ground squirrels is to use a carrot in a live chat, and then you can teach them to swim.
Okay. Peppermint does deter some squirrels because squirrels are allergic to peppermint. So they have peppermint oils that you can then spray on your plants. But you have to do it quite often because if you're watering or the rain will wash it off the plants. But it works really well for like berry plants where the squirrels are just stripping, all your gooseberries off your plant or something, and you spray it with peppermint oil. Sometimes it'll work, but sometimes they're like, peppermint. Okay, let's talk about climate. So you want to know what zone you're in before you plan out your garden. And it's interesting because I just picked up my mail today, and in Costco Connection, there's a story here about getting in the zone. It's about the growing zones. So here's the nationwide growing zone map. So the USDA, Department of Agriculture, puts out this plant hardiness zone map so that people can understand what climate they're living in, and it's especially good for gardeners. Our local zones, here they are. So zone 4A, the purple, is the coldest zone. So it's the highest elevation and the coldest zone. That's Aspen and Snowmass and Woody Creek area. And then zone 4B is basalt, gypsum, eagle. Carbondale kind of is split between zone 5A and 5B. And then Newcastle and Glenwood Springs is 5B and 6A, and Newcastle and Rifle over here are in this big gray area, which is the warmest area. So the lower you go, the warmer it is, obviously. That's how elevation works. And it's pretty much 5-degree difference between all of these zones, 5 degrees. So if it's 65 here in Carbondale, it's probably 60 in Basalt and 55 in Aspen. That's just kind of the rule of how that works. Okay, and here's another little thing we need to pay attention to, the average first and last frost dates. So that means that the last frost date in the spring, about what average time does that happen? And in the fall, our first frost, what's the average of that time period? In zone 4A, it's average last frost, so we're talking about spring planting, so we want to know when the last frost is going to be. is about early July, about the same as Vale. So you can see what a short growing season they have. Here's the first frost, early July. Here's the last frost. Here's the first frost, mid-August. So that is a very, very short growing season. Now, if you're in Glenwood Springs, your frost is late. Your last frost is in late May. Your first frost is in late September. Really long growing season. So you can grow things that, have a 90-day growing season. Where if you're in Aspen, you don't want to grow things that take 90 days because you don't have 90 days. And you'll see that this is divided up into cool season crops. So the blue is cool season crops: spinach, lettuce, beets, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, peas is in there. Then we get semi-tender warm season crops and cucumbers, beans, corn, maybe beans and corn, I don't know. Then we have the warm season, like peppers and eggplants and cantaloupes and those kind of things. So they're talking about warm season and cool season. And you can plant the cool season crops before the frost and also right at the end of the season up to the next frost. So cool season and warm season plants. I did not understand this when I first started gardening here. And it really makes a difference when you're gardening to know that your plant is either frost hardy, like these, so that means it can handle a little bit of frost, a little bit of cold weather, or frost tender. A frost will damage or kill these plants. So in herbs, we have cilantro, chives, dill, mint, thyme, parsley on the hardy side, and basil, rosemary, lemongrass, tarragon, oregano, the more tropical or Mediterranean type herbs on the tender side. Annual flowers come in frost hardy and frost tender, and vegetables also. So at this time of year, before the last frost has come, we can be growing lettuce and peas, spinach and radishes and kale. And if a frost comes, it won't damage those crops. But you definitely don't want these crops outside this time of year. So warm season vegetables, you can either plant them indoors. So this is peppers. You plant them 7 to 8 weeks before the last spring frost. So if your last spring frost, for instance here in Carbondale, your average last frost is around June 10th, June 12th, around there, then you're going to want to plant these in April, around April, so that they'll be ready to transplant out when the frost has passed. But some things don't like transplanting. So for instance, corn you're told to direct sow 1 to 2 weeks before the last spring frost. That's iffy. I usually plant maybe 1 week before the average last frost. And then I'm ready to cover it if a frost does come, because it will die. So warm season vegetables, either indoors or wait until later and plant them outdoors. Cool season vegetables really like cool seasons. They want the cool weather, so they don't do well in the heat, like in July and August. So you want to either sow those very early indoors, like it says here, or direct seed outdoors 2 to 4 weeks ahead of the last frost date. And then get those out into the garden when the weather's still cool to mature before the heat of July comes in. And then pretty much all leaf vegetables can be planted early in the spring, and they don't need to be planted indoors. They grow very quickly. They grow in cool weather, so you can just plant those directly into the ground outdoors. This says, let's see, we're in this zone here, April to May. Yeah, that's about right. Okay, seed selection. So how do you know what's good to grow here? Well, the seed catalog or the seed package will tell you how long of a season you need. So The maturity date on these beets is 55 days, so no problem. You could pretty much grow these anywhere, even in Aspen. But if it says 110 days and you live in Aspen, don't buy those seeds. You're never going to have any success with those seeds. So pay attention to the maturity date. Sometimes it'll say days to harvest. That's the same thing, the maturity. Seed packages also tell you how to plant, so the depth, what to thin to, whether it needs sun or shade. And this says when to plant, direct sow, so in the ground, after the danger of frost. So the seed package should tell you everything you need to know. And if you are getting a whole bunch of seeds that need to be started indoors, you need a whole system set up for that to grow indoors. And I'm going to show you when we do our planting demonstration what that involves. So how much space do you have? You know, how many of these plants do you really want to start indoors? Think about that too, your space and the money you want to put into a system to start those indoors. Now, hybrid versus heirloom. Hybrids are just plants that have been bred for certain traits. So they take this tall pea plant and this short pea plant and they breed them together and they get these two tall pea plants that have delicious peas, whatever. Usually they're breeding for flavor, for the garden. These kind of things are all bred for flavor. For instance, sweet corn is a hybrid for sweetness. They breed it for sweetness. They do breed also commercially for travelability, so the ability to truck tomatoes from Mexico to California or Colorado. They won't bruise easily because they have thick skins. So that's why they hybridize things, is just to get better traits. And that really works in our favor here in this climate because, as you can see, days to harvest of the hybrid is 65 days. Days to harvest of the heirloom is 110 days. So that's a big, big difference. Heirlooms are plants that are true to seed. So you plant the seed, you grow the plant, you collect the seed, you get the same exact plant as the parent plant. You can't do that with hybrids. You can't collect the seeds, or you can, but if you plant them, you're going to get one of these and one of these and one of these. You're going to get all kinds of different plants. You're not going to get that true plant that you got those seeds from. So just remember that if you want to save seed, you need heirlooms. This tomato you can harvest in 52 days. This tomato takes 82 days. So that's a real big difference. So pay attention to your seed catalog and your seed package, and then you'll know what you should not even be bothering with. And this is true of vegetables, flowers, and herbs. There's hybrids and heirlooms in all of those. So, annual herbs and flowers, should you plant seeds for these, or should you buy plants and transplant them into your garden? Well, it depends, like I said, on how much space you have. If you need to sow all these flowers 8 to 12 weeks before the average last frost, you're going to need a whole room full of shelves and lights and trays for all of these seeds. So if you don't have enough space to do all of these flowers in addition to maybe all of your vegetables, choose wisely which ones you want to grow from seed. These can be sown outdoors, direct sown 1 to 4 weeks before the average last frost. So these are great for just sowing directly into your garden. Some you propagate from cuttings, like rosemary and lavender, oregano and thyme. So if you've got some of those, you can propagate them, or if a friend has some, propagate from cuttings. And you can go online or to the library and find out how to do that. Bulbs, spring blooming bulbs should have been planted in the fall so that they come up in the spring. Tulips, daffodils, crocus, narcissus. And then summer fall blooming are planted in the spring or the summer, usually waiting until after the frost, because these are all tender plants here. Gladiolus and dahlias and lilies will be killed by a frost, so it's good to plant those later on. And then seeds that need special treatment, so scarification is just roughing up the seed with some sandpaper just to break that hard husk that's on the seed. Or you can soak it. So sweet peas and nasturtiums, morning glories, peas and corn, you can soak those overnight, and that breaks or softens that husk and allows that to germinate, the seed to germinate faster. Germination is just sprouting, just means sprouting. Seeds that need cold stratification, so that means they need to really be frozen before they will break open and grow. So bachelor buttons, hollyhocks, thyme, chamomile, delphinium seeds. Most wildflowers and perennials need cold stratification. You can either put the seeds in the freezer for a few weeks, or if they're outdoors in your garage, in a cold garage outside, that'll work too, just as long as they get some freezing, because that's what breaks open their husk. And germination, light or dark. Some seeds germinate better with light on them, and some actually do better germinating in the dark. Usually the larger seeds germinate better in the dark. They're the ones that are covered with soil anyway, so they're kind of in the dark. The smaller seeds are up near the surface of the soil, and they will germinate in the light. Pansies, borage, and zinnia germinate in the dark, and snapdragons and petunias germinate in the light. So for instance, now how do you know which is which? If it says on the package of seeds, germinate in the dark, then do that. If it doesn't say anything about it, then germinate in the light. All right, any questions on that stuff? Okay. Let's talk about soil. Soil is not dirt. Soil is what you're growing your plants in. Dirt is what you have on an unpaved road that will grow nothing. So remember that soil is a living environment. Soil contains minerals, organic matter, worms, insects, bacteria, fungi, air, and water. That's what's in soil. Dirt contains minerals, basically just minerals. There's no living things in dirt. The most important part of the soil is the mycelium, which is a fungus that connects the roots of the plants and the soil and the minerals all together. So it helps facilitate getting nutrients and water and everything into the plant's roots. So that is a really important part of the whole ecosystem of your garden, the mycorrhizal network. So this network goes all underground, all among the roots. You might dig into your soil and find this and think, oh my gosh, there's a fungus in my soil, I got to get rid of it. No, that's the best thing you could ever find in your soil. That means you have a really healthy mycorrhizal network in there. So the rules to protect your soil from being over dried or basically hurting the living environment of your soil. The rules are, don't till or turn over your soil with a shovel. A lot of people like to turn over every spring their garden. That destroys the mycorrhizal network. It kills the worms. It dries out the soil. It's just really bad for the soil to do that. You want your soil to stay intact, in place. So you can dig down a little bit, and scrooch up the soil a little to fluff it up a little on the top, but don't dig down and never till. Tilling is the worst thing you can do for soil. So if you want to build soil for your garden, the lasagna method is a really great way to build soil for a garden for next year. It has to break down and create soil for next year's garden. So the first layer that you put down is newspaper or cardboard. I use cardboard generally because it keeps the weeds from growing in too quickly. And then you're going to want to put in a green layer, so green layers all throughout. And that can be grass clippings or plant cuttings or green manure. Then brown layers are leaves and straw, composted manure. And you can put paper in between all of these, or you can put straw or hay in between all of them. So there's various ways to do it, but basically you just want to layer brown and green, and then the cardboard and the paper kind of breaks down in there too. And newspaper is completely safe. It's completely biodegradable. Even the ink is made of soy, so there's no problem with that in your garden. The top layer will have 4 to 6 inches of soil with some compost or some composted manure. So compost is just your garbage, your kitchen scraps, your egg shells, peels, and all of that. And you can find out more about composting online or in books or magazines. So if you want to compost, then that will build soil for your garden every year. You'll have fresh, new, perfect, good soil for your garden to put in there from your compost. And then you want to mulch it again on top with leaves or straw or grass clippings when you plant, because that, again, prevents moisture, but it also breaks down. This all will biodegrade into your soil and create nutrients in your soil. So that's great too. And remember, mulch prevents weeds and retains moisture. So you definitely want to use mulch. And if you don't make your own compost, you can buy compost in bags at garden centers and Ace. Then if you have a situation where you have grass or rocks in your soil and you just can't dig a garden or make a garden in your soil, you can always have a box bed of some type. Hay bales, straw bales, wood, cinder block. And remember, cinder block is going to heat up. So if you have warm things, you want to put them in there. If things are like cool weather, they probably don't want to be in a cinder block bed because it will be quite warm. And you can either use your lasagna method to fill this with soil, or you can buy bag soil from Garden Center or Ace Hardware or Lowe's. And your location of your garden, if you grow it for the fruit or the root, you need full sun. So that would be like 8 to 12 hours a day of full sun, no shade on that garden. So that's for things like tomatoes and peppers and beans and carrots and things like that. But if you're growing it for the leaves or stems or sprouts, lettuce, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, that type of thing, you can grow those in partial shade. So if you have, full sun in the morning and full sun in the afternoon, but in the middle of the day there's a tree that shades your garden, you could grow your leaf crops there. And if you want to do an in-ground garden bed and have it for this season to build a new garden bed, this is how you would do that. So you lay out the space. This is a 10 by 10 space. We scraped off the turf with shovels. Then you place bagged soil or your compost, whatever soil you have, about 4 inches deep. Then you lay out the paths. We had paths going across the center in both directions. Then you put in your drip irrigation, which I recommend. And then you place your mulch. So we place the mulch in the paths and around the edges, turn on the water, and then plant your seeds. So that is if, our soil here is so rocky. So if you don't want to try to spend, weeks and weeks trying to dig out a good garden area, this is a really great kind of instant garden. It's a lot of work, but you've got a garden when you're done. So, planting outdoors, you want to think about crop rotation. So where you planted everything last year is not where you should plant it again this year. You should rotate your crops into different areas. And the reason for that is that diseases and pests, insect pests, hide in the soil. They overwinter in the soil, or their eggs do. And then they come out the next spring, and if you've got your leaf crops in the exact same place, they're like, great, I'm in. I'm going to eat all your leaf crops now. And they'll lay their eggs, and those will hatch, and they'll eat your leaf crops. But if they come out of the ground and there's carrots there, they'll either die for lack of food, or they'll take off and go find where the leaves are. So if you just rotate them every year into a different location for 3 years, and then for the 4th year you can go back to the year 1 location. That will really help deter pests from your garden. So preparing the bed, you're going to rake off the mulch that you put on last year, which you should have done. Rake that mulch off, but don't get rid of it. Put it in a bucket or something. Reserve that for adding to your garden around your plants later. You want to soak that area that you're going to plant so that it penetrates down 2 inches. And then you're going to place your markers in the front, because you put them in the back, then the plants grow up and hide the markers. So you want the markers in the front where you can see them. And you want to put your markers in first, because inevitably you will forget what you just planted in that row. So put the marker in, then plant the seeds. So what I do is I kind of like make a little strip with my edge of my hand here, and that allows the water then to go into that area where the seeds are. And then in there, in those strips, I poke the holes for the seeds. Or you can also just scatter the seeds along this whole trench here. And then cover it up. You want to plant at the correct depth, though. So we need to talk about what is that correct depth for planting seeds. This is one of the areas that messes people up too, because if you don't know how deep you're planting something or how deep it needs to be, you may not get anything at all. I had a guy who planted our heirloom carrot seeds from the Heritage Garden, and he said they didn't come up. And I said, really? How deep did you plant them? Oh, about 4 inches. Well, carrot seeds really don't need to be buried at all. You could just whisper some soil over the top of the carrot seed, and they're great with that. So obviously, you know, he had this situation here, too deep. The plant does start growing, but it never really reaches the surface and will not complete its life cycle. But if it's too shallow, then you see the little roots are kind of sticking out above the surface of the soil, and that can dry the roots out, and then it makes this really kind of floppy. It'll just flop over the stem. So you don't want it too shallow either. So the ideal planting depth for seeds is twice the size of the seed. So this broad bean is very large, and it's twice the depth. So if another broad bean were up here, that's twice the depth of that bean. So the heavier, bigger seeds go down deeper, the smaller ones shallower. So on the seed package, it'll tell you how deep to plant it, but if it doesn't for some reason, just use that planting depth equal to twice the size of the seed. All right, so after you have planted outdoors, you want to protect those seeds. You want to protect the seeds from wind and from water splashing. So when you water from overhead or even rain, it'll splash the seeds all out, and your nice, neat rows will be gone, and the seeds will just be everywhere because of water splashing. And also, you know, mulch like this conserves the water, so I just put a very light layer of leaf mulch, maybe 1/2 inch of leaf mulch over here, then some sticks across the top to keep it from blowing away in the wind. And then I have my mesh cover that keeps the dogs and cats and other things out of there. It'll even keep out grasshoppers and cabbage moths. So you know those white butterflies that fly around here? Those are cabbage moths, and they'll lay their eggs on your plants, and then the caterpillars come out and eat your plants. So you want to keep them off your plants if you can, and this will keep the butterflies out of. So if you wanted to grow cold crops, for instance, cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, this would be a great system to have that in. And because those all grow fine in partial shade, the shade from this mesh won't affect them. You wouldn't want to grow anything under this mesh that needs full sun all day, because it will shadow a little bit of the sun out. Cloth sheet will protect from that water splash. I use this method quite often. So this is burlap. You can also use the remet or the frost blanket. Just cut it into the size of your planting area and staple it down with these little garden staples that you can get at the garden center. And then you can water right through that. And so the frost blanket, burlap, a cotton sheet, or a pillowcase, just water right on top of it. And the water drips down, goes into the soil, and waters the seeds without splashing everywhere. But be sure to remove it as soon as the seedlings come up, especially with burlap, because they will go through the burlap. And then when you pull the burlap off, it'll pull all your seedlings out. So just be sure to kind of check it every day, and when they start to sprout, you can take that off. And then the roots will be connected to the soil enough that they won't get splashed out with water. Succession planting. So if you have a package of seeds and you plant every single seed in that package, you are going to have this much lettuce and this much radishes. And I don't think anyone can eat that much lettuce or radishes in a week. And you can't just leave them there, because the lettuce will soon become bitter, bolt, go to seed, and you won't be able to eat it. So you can't just leave it in the garden until you want to eat it. You have to eat it when it's ready. Same with radishes. You're not going to eat 400 radishes in a week. So don't plant 400 radishes in a day. So you save some of your seed in your package, and you plant every 2 to 3 weeks for continuous harvest all season long. So this is succession planted lettuce. This is the first planting, and it's ready to eat now. This is the second planting, which will be ready in another week or so. And then these two plantings, maybe this one was first, a few more weeks, and then after that, this row, and then this row right here, 3 to 4 weeks out, that'll be ready. So that's how you can have your crops all season long, all summer, instead of just 1 week. You have all your lettuce and all your produce ready at one time. You can do succession planting 2 different ways. You can plant the same crop spaced out in different time periods like this, so all lettuce just weeks apart. Or you can do it with different vegetables. So if you planted peas and now your peas are done in May or June, now you can plant carrots there in that same spot. Just pull out all your peas and plant some carrots or lettuce or whatever else you want to grow. So if you have a longer growing season, you can have more successions. If you have a shorter growing season, you'll have less successions, but you can still usually do a few successions, especially of things like lettuce that are fast growing. And you want to thin your seedlings once they start growing in those rows that you planted. You generally want to plant 2 seeds to kind of close together in each spot. And that is because if one doesn't germinate, the other one will, and you won't have a gap in your plantings. So you always will plant 2 seeds. And that's true of planting in pots too. You'll plant 2 seeds, and then you just get rid of the ones that you don't want. In this case, there were 3 seeds planted. So you're going to cut out the smaller ones, leave the bigger ones. So you want to choose the healthiest one to save, and then the smaller ones, you can get rid of those. And you want to cut them with scissors. Don't try to pull them out, because then you're disturbing the roots of the other seedlings that you want to save. So you don't want to pull them. You can pinch them with your fingernails or use scissors. And keeping track is a really good idea, because you want to know about when your stuff's going to be ready to harvest. So if it said 55 days and you planted it on June 9th, you go out 55 days on your calendar and you put harvest beets, like that. So in this case, this is June last year when I was professionally gardening, which I no longer do, so don't ask. So for Kay, I planted her first corn here. And then a week later, I planted a second succession of corn. So that, and actually this corn had a little bit longer growing season. So this will be ready first, and then a few weeks later, this corn will be ready. So that's succession planting. Now you notice we had a frost on June 22nd, which is very late for a frost, but it happens. Remember, the average last frost doesn't mean that's the day it's going to happen. It means somewhere around that day. So the frost nipped the squash and the beans and the peppers. And I will note every year when the first and last frosts happen on a planting calendar like this, just so I can kind of see, you know, the general pattern. There isn't one, so don't, there is no pattern. But from year to year, if you go back to your calendar, you go, okay, maybe I shouldn't plant my stuff out this early. For instance, here I transplanted tomatoes. If I had transplanted these tomatoes here, they would have gotten killed by that frost. So I kind of use this to sort of inform myself of how and when I should be planting things. And if you're going to be snipping out seedlings and growing lots of different things in your beds, you want to know what these seedlings look like as opposed to what the weeds next to them look like. So learn to identify your seedlings. Tomatoes and marigolds look very similar when they're this small. Corn just looks like grass. And I actually had my client help me weed one year. Guess what she weeded? The corn, which she thought was grass. Lettuce and sunflowers look kind of similar. Beans are pretty distinctive. Squash has this kind of distinctive look to it. But what you want to pay attention to also is the anatomy of the plant. So when you plant that seed, the radical comes out first. That becomes the root. The seed actually lifts up out of the ground, and the shell falls off, and the first leaves are inside there. The cotyledon is what they're called, the cotyledons. Those are really the first leaves. So these are cotyledons. These here, these are both cotyledons. These little leaves on each side, cotyledons. These leaves are the true leaves. So that's the leaf of the plant, what all the leaves on the plant are going to eventually look like, the true leaves. So you want to pay attention to when those true leaves come and how many of them there are, and that helps you determine when it's time to transplant and that type of thing. So don't worry when these cotyledons die and fall off. That's what they do. So if you have this plant and it's growing and you're like, great, this is wonderful, and then these two leaves turn yellow and die and you're freaking out because you think your plant is dying, no, it's supposed to happen like that. The cotyledons fall off. Now there are two types of plants. There are dicots and monocots. A dicot is a dicotyledon, two cotyledons, two. A monocot is a monocotyledon, one cotyledon. So grasses all have one. So it was probably, maybe this was the cotyledon, now these are the true leaves coming out. So just good to know a little bit about plant anatomy when you're trying to grow these things. So planting seeds indoors, I'm going to have a little demonstration here, but we'll kind of go through the process just to familiarize yourself with this. You want to get yourself some seed pots, and those can be almost anything. These are peat pots, and that is made of peat that biodegrades in the ground. So you can plant these directly into the ground, and these are great for things like squash that doesn't like its roots disturbed. So transplanting squash, it always gets really droopy and it's not very happy. These you can just plant right into the ground and they'll just biodegrade. I usually poke holes in the sides so the roots can get out. Same with this, egg cartons you can use, and you can plant those right in the ground. However, these are very shallow, so this is something you're going to want to plant something small in, or something that takes a long time to grow, or just a few weeks before you're going to put it in the ground, you can plant in here and then rip out those little egg places and just stick that directly into the ground when you plant. You can make them out of paper. They have little kits for that. You can use the nursery kind of pots that are plastic and the little plastic tray that holds them. And then you're going to want this leak-proof tray to put all of your pots into so that you can water them and it won't dribble all over your floor. And you're going to want your plant markers. And those plant markers, that was a box of 1,000 that I bought at Walmart like 10 years ago, and I'm still using those. So don't buy a box of 1,000. I mean, I'm a professional gardener, and I still haven't gone through all of these. Now that box costs about $15 at Walmart, but you can get a box of 200 of these plant markers for $5. So, you know, they're basically just wooden popsicle sticks or craft sticks, which are great for writing on in pencil, and they won't fade off. So that's what I use pretty much exclusively for marking my plants. You can use, you don't need one of these, you know, nursery type trays. You could use a pan, a metal pan or something, 2-inch sides maybe, if you wanted to use something like that. And then you're going to want some seed starting mix that is organic if you are going to eat the things that you're growing. If you're just growing flowers, ornamental, then you can use non-organic if you want to. But you definitely want to use organic if you're going to be eating this stuff. And don't use your outdoor soil if you can help it. This seed starting mix has everything that seeds need. So it has a little bit of food in it, it's the right texture. It's just really good for seed starting. If you are going to use your soil from your ground outside, you will need to put it on a baking pan and put it in your oven at about 400 for maybe half an hour, and that will kill all the pathogens in that soil, and then you could use it for your planting indoors. You'll need a watering can and a spray bottle and a tub so that you can moisten the soil. And again, you don't want it too wet and you don't want it too dry. You want it to be just right. So test it and then you're good to go. So you fill the pots with the moist soil and you tamp them down. I find these pill bottles work really great for the really small areas to tamp down, but you can use a cup or anything that is the right size just to push the soil down. You want the soil to be sort of compacted, not too fluffy or light, because that way the roots come in contact with the soil and the water and everything in there. Okay, then you're going to want to make 2 holes in your soil and put a seed in each hole. And remember, that is for the purpose of germination. In case one doesn't germinate, you'll have another one in there. And then you're going to cover the holes with soil really lightly to whatever depth, you know, your seed is supposed to be planted. You can either pick up a little soil and just sprinkle it over the top, or you can just pinch the soil together over the top of the seed. And then tamp it down again just lightly with your hands, just so the seed is in good contact with the soil. And then moisten it with the spray bottle. So you're going to want to keep these seeds moistened with that spray bottle every day. Don't let the top of the soil dry out, because then the seed could die. If it starts to sprout and then it dries out, then it's gone. So you want to keep it moist on the top of that soil while the seed is sprouting. Water, light, and heat are what seeds need to sprout, mostly. Some of them do sprout in the dark. So if you want them to grow straight and well, an overhead light like this, and I have brought mine here, and you can see this is adjustable, so you can lower it. Pretty nice. It only has 1 bulb, which is a little bit of a problem for those wide trays. It doesn't quite reach out to the other sides of the tray, so I'll sometimes shift it around, but it does a pretty good job. It's nice to have a 2-light situation. This one here has 2 lights, and you can see how it illuminates the entire tray here, which is really nice. So if you put them in a window, a sunny window, they're going to lean like this towards the light and get really leggy, and that is not an ideal situation. You want your stems to be kind of short and strong, not really long and spindly. But if you don't want to invest in lights, and the lights, let's see, I think I had, yeah. So the lights are about $35 for one of those units. $35 to $50 you can spend. And you can get them on Amazon or at garden centers. They're much more expensive at garden centers, of course. And then you need a heat mat. Most seeds need soil that is about 65 to 70 degrees to sprout. So a heat mat really speeds up that process and gets them going a lot better than if you don't have a heat mat. And I've experimented both ways, with a heat mat and without. With the heat mat, my seeds sprouted in about 5 to 7 days. Without the heat mat, it took about 9 days for them to sprout. So it really does help them. The best way to do the lights is on a timer like this, so that you don't have to remember to turn your lights on and off every single day. It just comes on every morning, goes off every night. About 10 hours a day is perfect. And so you want to, like I said, spritz the top of the soil while they're germinating. But once they get to this stage, really how you want to water is lift up these, one of these little 4-packs and pour water into the tray and let the soil soak up the water from underneath. So if you're using Dixie cups, you would need to poke holes in the bottom so that water can come up through. But all of these other things like peat pots, eggshell, whatever, egg cartons, those things will absorb the water up into them. But that is really the best way to water, and it will keep your plants from getting this disease, this fungal disease, which is called damping off. And that's because the top of the soil is wet and the roots and the stem are all wet because you're watering them with spray or over on the top. And this fungus causes the stem to just basically blacken and die, and the whole plant falls over, and that's a dead plant. So that's what damping off is, if you've ever experienced that growing seedlings. You've got too much water there. Basically, you can go by what the plant looks like. If the plant is drooping, it needs water. If it's yellowing, it's got too much water. So just go by how it looks. Planting seeds indoors, you also need to thin because you've planted 2 seeds in each pot. So now you're going to take out the ones that you don't want. You can actually eat those thinnings. They're vegetables, if they're vegetables. If they're flowers, probably don't eat them. But if they're the type of plant that you're going to eat the stem or the leaf, you can also eat those thinnings. Just throw them in your salad or pop them in your mouth. Things like tomatoes and peppers, you don't eat those leaves, so don't eat the thinnings. If you need to transplant seedlings because they've gotten too large and they're not ready to go outside yet, you can transplant them into a larger pot when there are 4 to 6 true leaves. So these are true leaves again. There's only 2 here, so it's not ready to transplant. These are the cotyledons, but these you can see have at least 4 to 6 true leaves on them. And they were in very small pots and got very root bound. You can see the roots all in here. So then those go into bigger pots until you can put them outdoors, or into a bigger pot if you're growing in pots outdoors. Okay, when you're ready to transplant outdoors, and this is true of all tender annuals, vegetables, flowers, and herbs, whether you bought them in the store or you raise them from seed, don't just pop them in the ground one day because they'll go into shock. So what you want to do is harden off your plants. That just means you're toughening them up to live outside now. Because remember, they've been living inside with no wind, no sunlight, nothing. They're just coddled. And now you throw them out into the environment and they'll go into shock. So hardening off is really important. You do it in a partially shaded location for 4 hours a day. Just put them outside and then bring them back in for about 2 or 3 days. And then they'll be ready to go outside and live out there for good. Or you can keep them in a cold frame like this with the doors open during the day and then closed during the night before you transplant them out. You want to transplant in the cool of the evening, not in the morning or the middle of the day when the plant is then going to be exposed to heat all day long. And you want to water the soil before and after transplanting. And then, of course, you want to mulch after you transplant. And you want to have some protection from the cold nights, because even though it may be long past the day for the average last frost, there might be another frost on June 22nd, like happened last year. So you just want to be prepared in case you have a cold night to protect those things. If you don't have any room for garden beds, you can still grow in pots. Here's a bunch of lettuce in this little window planter there, some herbs in these pots, and these can be easily brought indoors if there's going to be a frost. So that's one good advantage of having things in pots. These are obviously going to be too big to bring indoors, but you could throw a frost blanket over this whole thing and protect all of these, which are eggplants and tomatoes and peppers. All the tender things here need to be protected. But if you're in a situation like this near your house, if you're on a patio, if you've got brick, here's some white siding which is going to reflect sunlight. The window is going to reflect sunlight and heat. The gravel down here is going to reflect heat. So remember, this is going to be a really warm spot. So it's a perfect spot for, warm season vegetables with all of this heat around your house. But you probably wouldn't want to grow cool season vegetables in a situation like this because they prefer cooler soil and cooler conditions. The pots also need frequent deep watering. Pots tend to dry out because the surface of them is heating up, so they're heating up the soil inside, it's evaporating out. So pots need a lot more watering than if you're growing in the ground. You could always go vertical onto a fence. So you can train winter squash and cucumbers and melons to go up a fence like this. Peas and pole beans, they'll climb up on their own. So that's a good way to pack a lot of food into a small space if you don't have a big garden area. Or you can put your vegetables and herbs right into your landscape. So this is kale. Here's some kale. This is another kind of kale, or maybe cabbage. That's cabbage. And then this looks like it might be beets. And you have some marigolds in here. You could have garlic and onions in here. You could even have tomatoes. If you are not good at recognizing the plants for what they are, you might need some tall markers to say, oh, that's kale, Otherwise, you could miss it and just think, oh, that's a nice flowering plant I put in there. And so, you can find space to garden, is what I'm saying. There's lots of places you can garden. Fertilizer. I don't use a lot of fertilizer because I use compost, and compost really feeds the soil. Compost has almost everything you need in it for the soil. It has NPK, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in compost. It's good to add a little manure to your compost. That's the one thing it's kind of missing if you're just using food scraps. Manure really adds a lot of nitrogen, and you don't want to use horse manure because that has a lot of seeds in it, because horses don't digest seeds, so they poop them out, so don't use that. But you can use goat, sheep, chicken, cow, any of those manures work great. You put fresh manure into your compost and it breaks down. But if you're going to fertilize your garden, you don't want to use fresh manure in your garden because it's hot. It's breaking down and creating heat, and it'll burn your plants. So don't use fresh if you're putting it directly in your garden. You can use these bag soils. There's synthetic soils that look like this. You sprinkle it on the ground that have these minerals and nutrients in them. You can use organic types, which are actually just the minerals themselves packaged. This one is a 7-4-5, and this one is a 10-10-10. And what that means is parts per package. So this is 7 parts nitrogen, it's 4 parts phosphorus, and it's 5 parts potassium. And that is specifically for tomatoes and vegetables. So that's a blend that's made specifically for your food crops. I use, when I need to fertilize, I use liquid fish or kelp. Both of those have all the nutrients plants need also. That's pretty much the way the pioneers fertilized. They would go fishing, and then they would throw the fish guts and the heads in their gardens, and that fertilized it for them. And it's liquid, so you can mix it with water, and you can pour it directly on the leaves or on the soil around them. That's what I use. I really don't use these kinds of all because I use the compost and the liquid, and that seems to be enough. But the first defense is really healthy plants for insect control. So for diseases, insect control, all of that, you want your plant to be healthy, which means it's getting the right amount of water. It's not too dry, it's not too wet. It's got the nutrients it needs. It's not in a location where the sun is burning it, or it's not in a shady location where it's not getting enough sun. All those things will make plants sickly. This plant is healthy, and it's inviting the good pollinators to come and pollinate. This plant is sick, and it just wants to die. So it says, please kill me. Just end it for me. Put me out of my misery. The two kinds of insects that we have in the spring mainly are aphids and caterpillars. Aphids are a problem in the house with houseplants, in greenhouses, sometimes outdoors, but mainly on plants that are not real healthy is where aphids will show up and just proliferate. This, I don't know if you can see, but it's basically just covered with aphids. And what they do is they suck out the moisture from the plant and turn it into this. They just suck out all the moisture. And caterpillars are a problem in the spring because the eggs were laid last year, and then they hatch out and they start eating the plants that they were laid the eggs on, or plants nearby, or even in the soil. So caterpillars turn into butterflies, though. So you might want to be a little judicious about pulling off the caterpillars, and really hand picking is the best way to control caterpillars. You just pull them off. And you know, if you're concerned, oh, maybe this is going to turn into a monarch butterfly, you know, but I don't want it to eat my plants, then you put it out, you know, in the field somewhere, or in your neighbor's yard if you don't like them. Just get rid of them off your plants. But there are some beneficial insects that you can use to control the bad insects. And most of these can be bought at garden centers or online, and you'll get them in a little cup. And then at night, in the evening, you will release them into your garden. You do it at night because generally insects don't move around or fly much at night, so they'll stay on the plant, and if they like it there and they find the food, they'll stick around, and they'll lay their eggs, and then their babies will hatch out, and they will eat the insects that you don't want. Ladybugs eat aphids like crazy, so they're a great aphid control. And you want to make sure you know what the ladybug larva looks like. This is the ladybug larva. So even though it looks like a terrible bug you want to get out of your yard, it's a great bug. It's going to turn into a beetle, a lady beetle. So this is the first stage of the larva. Then it turns into this ugly looking thing, and then eventually it turns into that. So if you find those, you want those. The larvae actually eat about 10 times more aphids than the adults do. The adults are more concerned with breeding at this stage, so they're not eating that much, but the larvae will eat lots and lots of aphids. You can always use chemical treatment if you have a really bad problem and you just can't get it under control. You can make this homemade insect repellent. Be really careful with it because these are all very irritating ingredients for your eyes and your skin. So make sure you're wearing gloves when you're making this stuff and using it and spraying it. There's a garden safe house plant and garden spray, but how safe it is, I'm not sure, because it says caution right down here. And anything that says caution on it, I'm a little concerned it might not be safe for my food. And remember that if you're spraying the bad bugs, you're also spraying the good bugs. So if you have a bad aphid problem, but you have ladybugs on their plants taking care of it, don't spray them because you're going to kill all the ladybugs. And then the aphids will come back even worse. Companion planting is a great way to deter insects. So if you have a monocrop like this, which is a way a lot of gardeners grow things, just in rows or big blocks of lettuce or something, and commercial crops, of course, are produced like this, monocrops. It's basically a big eat here sign for bugs that like that crop. When they have a whole field of all the food that they want, they're going to move in and breed, and you'll never get rid of those bugs. So the best way to deter that is to either companion plant or intercrop. So this is intercropping, where you're just planting a whole bunch of stuff all next to each other, and that confuses the bugs. You know, the bug is looking for a carrot, and all it can find are leaves, but the carrots, you know, are down under here. So it just confuses them. This is the way I plant a lot. This is a garden that I take care of, or used to take care of. So garlic, this is garlic, which was planted last year. And then these are peas, which are going to grow up this trellis here. And these are lettuces, various kinds of lettuces. On the other side, I have a frost blanket over seeds that I just planted that are kale and spinach. So you can plant like this. The garlic will really deter a lot of bugs and pests from those nice juicy leaves. And there are companion planting charts like crazy on the internet. So, or in magazines, you can find lots of companion planting charts. For instance, if you have the cabbage moth problem, down here you can see oregano and sage repels cabbage moths. So you might want to plant those near your cabbage. That would make sense. Marigolds are really great. They kill nematodes, which is a soil-borne thing. I'm not sure what species it actually even is. It repels whiteflies, and it might repel rabbits. Some rabbits don't like the smell of marigolds, so that could be helpful. Okay, and if you need more resources, you can go to the Colorado State University Extension website. They have all of these informational pamphlets that you can get, lots and lots of resources on gardening. If you have a problem you can't solve, you can call your county extension office. So Garfield County Extension, I think it's in Rifle. There's an Eagle County Extension office, a Picken County, and ask them for a master gardener to come out and do a site evaluation. Master gardeners are basically just teachers. They teach about gardening in our climate. And so they will come to your site for free and do an evaluation and help you solve your problem. So that's a great resource if you just can't figure something out. Just have a master gardener come over. If you have a question, you can do an internet search pretty easily. How deep do I plant beets? Answer will pop up right away. You can watch YouTube videos on procedures and planting. That's always a great way to learn things. Or you can ask your local nursery employee questions. And the Heritage Gardens. So our Heritage Gardens are open for public viewing June through October. So you can just go to the Thompson House or to the Cabin and Jail Park and look at these gardens while they're growing. There are signs there, interpretive signs to tell you what's growing there, why it was selected, whether it's a local Carbondale heirloom like the cerise pole bean here, which was handed down from the cerise family for maybe 100 years now. We do sell these seeds at our museums and also at our events like Dandelion Day and Potato Day. And I teach gardening and seed saving classes at CMC also. So if you need more instruction or you know somebody who needs beginning gardening class or a seed saving class, you can look for those. at CMC. And we have a Carbondale Heritage Garden Club. So you can join us in the Heritage Gardens, taking care of our heritage vegetables and flowers and herbs. And you can visit our booth at Dandelion Day to sign up for that, or you can sign up back. If you put your email on there, I will send you out some information in case you want to join us. Or you can email me at info@carbondalehistory.org. Okay, happy gardening. All right.